Let's import some data to Algolia indices using the API client. Quick note: in this video I will use the PHP client as it's one of our most popular, but the examples shown here are similar for the other clients. It's mainly the language syntax that changes. So we are going to cover how to set up your API client, how to import data from a local file, from a database by batches, and also how to import data directly from the source code. Setting up the API client. The first step to set up the API client is to install the package with the package manager. Here I am using Composer. But you can also import the file directly to your project. Then we create an instance of the client with the app ID and API key of the account or profile that you want to use. Note that to index or update records, you will need an admin API key. This admin API key should only be used on the backend and never visible to the end user. With that client variable, we can now initialize the index where we want to upload our data. Here, we simply need the name of the index to target. Now that we have a ready-to-use client, let's use it to import data from a local file. So I have a simple JSON file containing 500 actors objects. Each object has a name, a rating, an image path for their picture, an alternative name, and an ID. Now I'm reading the local actors.json file and assigning its content to the objects variable, printing the result to check that everything works fine. Good. Now we need to decode that JSON string to turn it into a usable object. The last step here is to call the index method addObjects, passing it objects as its argument. We run the program, and now let's go to the dashboard to check if everything is there. We now have our actors index containing the 500 objects and all the attributes. Importing data from a database. On MySQL server, I have previously created an actors table containing 500 rows. The columns are name, rating, image path, alternative name, and ID. Now I need to connect to the MySQL server from my app.php file. There are multiple ways to do this. Here I am using PDO. Preparing the query select star from the actors table, assigning the retrieved object from the fetchOb method to a results variable. Then a final step before pushing those to Algolia. I'm mapping the ID attribute of each actor to an object ID, which is Algolia Object Unique Identifier. Then I simply call the saveObjects method, passing the results variable. Here I use saveObjects instead of addObjects, the difference being that if some object with an existing object ID were already in Algolia's index, then it would simply update those with the new content provided. Here we're starting from scratch, so the objects are simply created. Heading back to Algolia's dashboard, let's see if the new index has been created. Yes, and it contains our actors. Importing from a database by batches. When dealing with a larger number of records, it is recommended to split those into 1,000. I have the same kind of objects in my database, except this time I don't have 500 but 50,000 rows to push. To do that, I create a new array called batch. Then, with a for each loop, I will add each row to the batch array. I'm mapping the ID attribute to an object ID. Once the batch array reaches 1,000 objects, I send it to Algolia using the saveObjects method, and I reset the batch array for the next loop iteration. Finally, I add a last saveObjects method outside of the for each loop to catch the final batch that might not reach the 1,000 count. So back to our Algolia dashboard, I can now select the actor's big index and check that all the 50,000 actors are already there. Importing from the source code. One last way to send data to Algolia can be directly done from the source code itself. You can simply create an object in your file and call the addObjects method. Side note, as we don't provide any object ID here, the saveObjects method wouldn't work. So now let's see how it looks in the dashboard.